My name is Bianca, and I am 32 years old. Last Christmas Eve, I sat alone in my tiny Brooklyn apartment watching snowflakes drift past my window, while the rest of the world celebrated with their families. Just 24 hours earlier, my father had stood up in front of 30 guests at our family dinner and declared that I was dead to him. He cut me off from everything, from everyone right there at the table where I had eaten Thanksgiving turkey as a child. But here is the thing nobody expected. The next morning, I woke up to 36 missed calls from the very people who had watched me walk out that door in silence. Before I share what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if stories about family betrayal and finding your own strength speak to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to the family I thought I knew, and the secrets they were keeping from me. I need to tell you about the Whitmore family, so you can understand what I was walking into that Christmas. My father, Richard Whitmore, was 61 years old and had built his empire from a single furniture store in downtown Greenwich, Connecticut. Over 4 decades, he had expanded that one shop into a chain of 12 high-end home furnishing stores scattered across New England. He was the kind of man who wore a 3-piece suit to Sunday breakfast and expected everyone at the table to sit up straight. His hair had gone completely silver by 50, and he kept it trimmed short, almost military style. His eyes were the color of winter storm clouds, pale gray and just as cold. I cannot remember the last time those eyes looked at me with anything resembling warmth. My mother, Diane, had just turned 58. She had been a pediatric nurse when she met my father at a charity gala 35 years ago. Within a year of their wedding, she had quit her job at his insistence. He wanted a wife who could host dinner parties and manage the household, not one who came home smelling of antiseptic and baby formula. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet 2 inches, with hair she had been dyeing honey blonde for as long as I could remember. She always wore the pearl necklace my father had given her on their 10th anniversary, touching it nervously whenever tension filled the room. My mother loved us. I believed that with my whole heart, but she loved my father more, or perhaps she feared him more than she loved herself. Either way, she had spent 3 decades choosing his approval over everything else. Then there was Marcus, my older brother, 35, and already being groomed to take over the family business. He had inherited my father's height and dark hair, along with his talent for making money and his complete lack of interest in anything that could not be monetized. Marcus wore designer suits and drove a German luxury sedan that cost more than most people's houses. His wife, Pauline, was exactly the kind of woman you would expect someone like Marcus to marry. She came from old money, spoke 3 languages, and had never worked a day in her life. They had been married for 7 years and seemed to communicate primarily through tight-lipped smiles and meaningful glances. My younger sister, Tessa, had just turned 28. She was the baby of the family, and she had leveraged that position into a lifetime of getting exactly what she wanted. Tessa looked like a porcelain doll, all golden curls and wide blue eyes, with a wardrobe that could have funded a small country's education system. 6 months before that fateful Christmas, she had married Derek, a corporate litigation attorney from a wealthy Boston family. Derek was handsome in that generic catalog model way, with perfect teeth and perfectly forgettable features. Together, they represented everything my father valued: success, status, and the appearance of perfection. And then there was me, Bianca, the middle child, the one who had somehow gone wrong. From the time I was old enough to hold a crayon, I had been obsessed with art. While Marcus studied business textbooks and Tessa practiced her piano scales, I was filling sketchbooks with drawings of everything I saw. The curve of my mother's neck when she bent over her sewing, the way light fell through the kitchen window on Sunday mornings, the gnarled oak tree in our backyard that looked like a dancing woman if you squinted just right. My father tolerated this hobby until I announced at 17 that I intended to study graphic design in college. The argument that followed is still seared into my memory. Richard Whitmore standing in his study, face red with rage, telling me that no daughter of his would waste her potential on doodling for a living. I stood my ground for the first time in my life, and eventually, he relented. He paid for my degree at the Rhode Island School of Design, but he made sure I knew it was only to save face with his business associates. A Whitmore dropout would be worse than a Whitmore artist barely. After graduation, I moved to Brooklyn and started working as a freelance graphic designer. I was not getting rich, but I was paying my bills and building a portfolio I was proud of. My apartment was small, a studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette the size of a closet. But it was mine. I had decorated it with my own artwork and plants that somehow survived despite my irregular schedule. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living authentically, even if my father made his disappointment clear every time we spoke. The comparisons never stopped. Marcus just landed $1 million account. Tessa's husband just made partner. And what are you doing, Bianca, still playing with your little pictures? I learned to let the comments roll off my back, or at least I thought I had. The truth was, every dismissive remark, every disappointed sigh, every time my father changed the subject, when I tried to talk about my work, it all accumulated like snow on a roof. I did not realize how heavy the weight had become until it finally collapsed. 3 months before Christmas, my father called to invite me to the 40th anniversary celebration of his company. It was going to be a massive event, 200 guests catered by the best restaurant in Connecticut, held at a historic mansion he had rented for the occasion. He did not ask if I could come. He informed me that my presence was expected. I was in the middle of the biggest project of my career. A tech startup in Manhattan had hired me to design their complete brand identity, everything from the logo to the website to their marketing materials. The deadline was brutal, and the money was better than anything I had ever earned. When I explained this to my father, trying to make him understand that I could not just drop everything, he exploded. "You have always been selfish, Bianca. This family has given you everything, and you cannot even show up for one night to celebrate what I have built. Do you know how this looks? Do you even care?" I tried to reason with him. I offered to come for a few hours before driving back to finish my work. I suggested video calling into the celebration. Every compromise was rejected. In Richard Whitmore's world, things were done his way or not at all. He hung up on me mid-sentence, and I sat in my apartment feeling like I was 12 years old again, crying in my bedroom because I was never good enough. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was thick with tears as she begged me to apologize to my father. "He is so hurt, Bianca. You know how much this anniversary means to him. Can you not just make this right?" I asked her, if he was planning to apologize for yelling at me. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. I told her I would think about it and ended the call feeling more alone than ever. But here is the thing about being the family disappointment. You spend so much time trying to prove them wrong that sometimes you forget to protect yourself. Despite everything, despite the criticism and the comparisons and the constant feeling of inadequacy, I still love them. I still wanted to believe that underneath all the dysfunction, we were a family that cared about each other. So when my mother called again in early December to invite me home for Christmas, I said yes. I spent 2 months preparing for that trip. I wanted to show my father that I was successful, that my art was not just a silly hobby, but a legitimate career. More than that, I wanted to give him something that would prove how much I still loved him despite everything. So I created a painting. Not a digital design, but an actual oil painting on canvas, 24 inches by 36 inches of his first furniture store, the way it had looked in old photographs from 1986. I spent over 100 hours on that painting, getting every detail perfect. The hand-lettered sign above the door, the vintage display in the window, even the crack in the sidewalk out front that had been there since before I was born. I wrapped it in brown paper and red ribbon, and I placed it carefully in my car, along with my suitcase, on the morning of December 23rd. I was ready to make peace. I was ready to show my father that I was worthy of his love. I had no idea that I was driving straight into an ambush. The drive from Brooklyn to Greenwich took almost 4 hours that December morning. Snow had been falling steadily since dawn, coating the highways in a thin layer of white that made every other driver nervous and slow. I did not mind. I had my coffee, my holiday playlist, and a heart full of foolish hope. The further I got from the city, the more elaborate the Christmas decorations became. Colonial houses wrapped in white lights, inflatable Santas standing guard on snow-covered lawns, wreaths the size of car tires hanging on doors painted in traditional reds and greens. By the time I crossed into Connecticut, I was actually humming along to the music, imagining how surprised my father would be when he unwrapped my gift. The Whitmore family home sat at the end of a long driveway lined with bare maple trees. It was a 3-story brick colonial that my great-grandfather had built in 1922, passed down through generations until it landed in my father's hands. The house had white columns flanking the front door and black shutters on every window. In winter, it looked like something from a Christmas card, stately and perfect, and completely unwelcoming to anyone who did not belong. As a child, I had loved this house. As an adult, I realized I had always been a guest here, never truly at home. I parked my car in the circular driveway and sat for a moment gathering my courage. Through the front windows, I could see the massive Christmas tree my mother put up every year, 12 feet of Douglas fir, decorated with ornaments collected over 40 years of marriage. I remembered hanging some of those ornaments as a child, standing on a step stool, while my mother held my waist to keep me from falling. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, now a little girl, who had not yet learned that love in this family came with conditions. My mother answered the door before I could ring the bell. She must have been watching for my car. She pulled me into a hug that lasted just a second too long. And when she pulled back, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes that her concealer could not quite hide. "Do not upset your father tonight," she whispered against my ear. "Just try to keep things peaceful." I wanted to ask her what she meant, why she was warning me before I had even stepped inside. But Marcus appeared in the hallway behind her, and the moment passed. My brother greeted me with a nod that was barely more than an acknowledgement that I existed. He was wearing what I thought of as his casual uniform, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and pressed khaki pants that still had a visible crease. His wife Pauline sat in the living room scrolling through her phone without looking up. She did not even pretend to notice I had arrived. "Hello to you too," I thought, but did not say. Tessa came bounding down the stairs like she was still a teenager, all smiles and perfume and perfectly curled hair. She hugged me with what felt like genuine warmth, but when she pulled back, I caught something in her expression that made me uncomfortable. It was the same look she used to give me when she had gotten me in trouble and was waiting for the explosion. Pity mixed with anticipation. I told myself I was imagining things. My father was in his study as always. I found him behind his massive mahogany desk papers spread out in front of him, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when I knocked on the open door, and for just a moment I thought I saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Surprise, regret. Whatever it was, it disappeared so quickly I could not be sure it had been there at all. "Bianca, you made it." He did not stand up. He did not offer a hug or even a handshake. He just nodded at the chair across from his desk, indicating that I should sit. I chose to remain standing. "Just wanted to let you know I am here," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I will help Mom with dinner." He had already returned his attention to his papers. "Fine. We eat at 6. That first dinner on December 23rd was just the immediate family. No guests, no business associates, just the 7 of us around the table in the formal dining room. My mother had prepared her famous roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, a dish she only made for special occasions. The china was the good stuff, the Wedgwood pattern that had belonged to my grandmother. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight and scattered tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a stage set for a play I did not know the script to. My father dominated the conversation as he always did. He asked Marcus about the quarterly numbers and nodded approvingly at the answer. He asked Derek about his latest case and complimented his legal strategy. He asked Tessa about the renovations on her new house and offered to send his contractor to help. Then he turned to me. "So, Bianca, Still doing your little art projects, I took a breath and reminded myself to stay calm. Actually, I just finished a major branding project for a tech company in Manhattan. They were very happy with the work, and they have already referred me to 2 other clients. My father made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Tech companies come and go. What happens when they go under and your referrals dry up? At least Marcus has job security. Tessa has Derek. What do you have? I have my talent and my reputation and a growing client list, I wanted to say. I have built something from nothing without your help, and I am proud of it. But I knew that anything I said would be twisted, used as evidence of my impracticality, my stubbornness, my failure to understand how the real world worked. So I just smiled and reached for my wine glass. Marcus took the opportunity to launch into a detailed description of a new supplier he had negotiated, with saving the company 17% on raw materials. My father listened with the kind of focused attention he had never once given to anything I said. Tessa jumped in with news about a charity gala she was organizing for Derek's law firm. Even Pauline contributed, mentioning a vacation property she and Marcus were considering in the Hamptons. I sat there pushing food around my plate, feeling smaller with every passing minute. The Bianca-shaped hole in this family's concerns had never been more obvious. They did not ask about my apartment, or my friends, or my life in Brooklyn. They did not care about the challenges I had overcome, or the success I was building. To them, I was an embarrassment to be tolerated, not a daughter to be celebrated. After dinner, I escaped to my childhood bedroom on the 2nd floor. My mother had kept it exactly as I had left it when I moved out, like a museum exhibit of my teenage years. Band posters still hung on the walls. My collection of art books still lined the shelves. The quilt my grandmother had made me still covered the twin bed. I lay on that bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering why I had thought this trip would be any different. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, I told myself. Tomorrow there will be guests and distractions. I just have to get through one more day. I had no idea how wrong I was. Christmas Eve morning arrived gray and cold, with a sky that promised more snow before nightfall. I woke up early, unable to sleep past 6, despite having tossed and turned most of the night. The house was quiet as I padded downstairs in my slippers, hoping for some peaceful time alone before the chaos began. My mother was already in the kitchen, her hair pinned up and an apron tied around her waist. She had been cooking since before dawn, preparing enough food to feed the 30 guests who would arrive that evening. I poured myself a cup of coffee and asked how I could help. For the next several hours, we worked side by side in comfortable silence. I chopped vegetables for the salad-arranged cheese on platters polished silver that had not been used since last Christmas. My mother hummed carols under her breath, and for just a little while things felt almost normal. Almost like we were a regular mother and daughter preparing for a regular holiday celebration. It was around 10 in the morning when she finally spoke. Your father has been under a lot of stress lately. The business, some issues with suppliers, you know how he gets. I nodded, though I was not sure what she was leading up to. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face me. What I am trying to say is, if he says anything tonight, anything that might hurt your feelings, try not to take it personally. He does not mean it. He just does not know how to express himself sometimes. I wanted to laugh. My father knew exactly how to express himself. He expressed his disappointment in me every chance he got. He expressed his approval of Marcus and Tessa loudly and often. The problem was not expression, but intention. I will be fine, Mom. I have heard it all before. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. I know you have, sweetheart. I know you have. Around 2 in the afternoon, I went up to my room to get ready for the dinner party. As I passed my father's study, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. This was unusual. He normally kept it closed and locked when he was not inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open. I needed to get extra chairs from the storage closet at the back of the room. At least that is what I told myself. But on my way past his desk, my eye caught a stack of papers with a blue legal cover. The words, "Last Will and Testament of Richard Andrew Whitmore," were printed across the top. I should have walked away. I knew that looking at those papers without permission was a violation of my father's privacy and trust. But something made me stop. Something made me flip open that cover and scan the first few pages. The document was dated 2 weeks earlier. It was clearly a revised version of whatever will my father had previously complete, with notarized signatures and official stamps. I did not understand most of the legal language, but I understood enough. I understood that the entire Whitmore estate, the business, the properties, the investment accounts, everything was to be divided equally between Marcus Whitmore and Tessa Whitmore Hayes. I understood that my name appeared nowhere in that document. Not as a beneficiary, not as a recipient of any token gift or family heirloom. Nowhere. My father had written me out of his will entirely. I stood there frozen, the papers shaking in my hands. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe this was an old draft. Maybe there was another version that included me. Maybe I was misunderstanding something. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me drop the papers back on the desk. I turned just as my father appeared in the doorway. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, and finally something that looked almost like satisfaction. Like he had been hoping I would find those papers. "You are not supposed to be in here," he said, his voice cold and level. "I was getting chairs," I stammered. "For the dinner. I saw the papers and I just—" He walked past me and gathered the documents, tapping them against the desk to straighten the stack before returning them to their folder. "That is not your concern." "Not my concern," I could hear my voice rising. "You cut me out of your will completely. And it is not my concern." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw in his eyes a distance that went beyond our usual disagreements. This was not disappointment or frustration. This was something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like dismissal. What I do with my estate is my decision, Bianca. If you have a problem with that, perhaps you should have made different choices in your life. Now please leave my study. I have work to finish before the guests arrive." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand an explanation, to ask him what I had done to deserve being erased from my own family. But the coldness in his eyes told me that nothing I said would make a difference. He had already made up his mind about me. Maybe he had made it up years ago, and I was only now seeing the truth. I walked out of that study on shaking legs, my mind racing. Did Marcus know about this? Did Tessa? Did my mother? Was I the only one in the dark? The only one who still believed that this family might actually love me? The party started at 5. By then, the house had been transformed. Caterers had set up a buffet in the dining room. A bartender mixed cocktails in the living room. The massive Christmas tree glittered with hundreds of lights, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Guests began arriving in their finest holiday attire, business associates, and their spouses, distant relatives I only saw once a year, neighbors who had known my father since before I was born. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, shaking hands and accepting air kisses, making small talk about the weather and the decorations, and how much I was enjoying being home for the holidays. No one asked me anything real. No one seemed to notice that my smile never reached my eyes. Dinner was announced at 7. 32 of us filed into the expanded dining room, where extra tables had been brought in to accommodate everyone. I noticed immediately that the seating had been arranged with careful intention. My father sat at the head of the main table with my mother on his right and Marcus on his left. Tessa and Derek had the next seats of honor. I had been placed at a side table between an elderly aunt I had met maybe 3 times in my life and a business associate whose name I could not remember. The message was clear. I was an afterthought, a courtesy invitation, not really part of the family at all. Throughout dinner, I watched my family from across the room. Marcus and Pauline laughed at something my father said. Tessa touched up her lipstick and leaned in to whisper something to Derek. My mother kept glancing at me with that worried expression she had worn all weekend. I wondered if she knew what was coming. I wondered if they all did. The main course had been cleared, and dessert was being served when my father stood up. He tapped his knife against his crystal glass, the high, clear sound cutting through the chatter like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence as every head turned toward him. Richard Whitmore commanded attention without trying. It was simply expected that when he spoke, everyone listened. "I would like to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "It is tradition in our family to use the Christmas gathering to share important news, and this year is no exception." I watched him from my seat at the side table, coffee cup, frozen halfway to my lips. There was something in his posture, a tension in his shoulders, that put me on alert. I had seen my father give hundreds of speeches at company events and family dinners. This one felt different. He began by thanking everyone for coming, for their friendship and loyalty over the years. He spoke about the meaning of family, about tradition, about the legacy he hoped to leave behind. His words were polished and precise, clearly rehearsed. Then he started talking about his children. "Marcus has been my right hand for the past decade. He has proven himself to be a capable businessman and a worthy successor to everything I have built." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Marcus nodded modestly, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "Tessa has brought our family honor through her marriage to Derek, a man of exceptional character and achievement, and she continues to make us proud through her charitable work and social contributions." Tessa beamed and reached for Derek's hand. My father paused. The room was silent, waiting. I realized I was holding my breath. But families are not always what we hope they will be. He continued, and now his voice had taken on a different tone. Harder, more deliberate. "Sometimes, despite our best efforts, someone chooses to walk a different path, a path that leads away from the family, away from the values we hold dear." He turned and looked directly at me. 30 pairs of eyes followed his gaze. I felt the blood drain from my face. Bianca has made it clear through her actions and her choices that she does not value this family. She did not attend our company's 40th anniversary celebration. She has repeatedly prioritized her own interests over her obligations to us. She has shown no respect for the sacrifices her mother and I have made for her. "Dad," I started to say, but he held up a hand to silence me. "I have thought long and hard about this decision. It is not one I make lightly." He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. "As of today, Bianca is no longer my daughter. She is no longer a part of this family. As far as I am concerned, she is dead to me." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the fire crackling in the next room, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her plate, tears running silently down her cheeks. She did not look up. She did not defend me. I looked at Marcus. He met my eyes briefly before looking away, and I saw something like triumph in his expression. He had known this was coming. He had probably helped plan it. I looked at Tessa. She was examining her manicure, deliberately not meeting my gaze. Derek had his hand on her shoulder, protective, as though I were somehow the threat in this scenario. I looked around the room at the faces of relatives and acquaintances, people I had known my entire life. Some looked shocked, some looked uncomfortable. A few I noticed with sickening clarity looked like they were enjoying the show. No one spoke. No one stood up to defend me. No one said, "Richard, this is not right." No one did anything at all. "Dad." I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I wanted. "I do not understand. What did I do? What did I do to deserve this?" My father had already sat back down. He picked up his dessert fork and examined it as though checking for water spots. "I think I have made myself perfectly clear, Bianca. You are no longer welcome in this house or in this family. I would appreciate it if you would leave now, so the rest of us can enjoy the remainder of our evening." The room remained silent. The guests stared at their plates or their phones, or the walls anywhere but at me. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with something thick and suffocating. I pushed back my chair and stood up. My legs were trembling so badly I was not sure they would hold me. I walked through the dining room past the side table where my untouched dessert sat melting past the Christmas tree, with its hundreds of lights past the fireplace, where my stocking still hung beside Marcus's and Tessa's. At the foot of the stairs, a hand caught my elbow. I turned to find my mother, her face wet with tears, her lower lip quivering. "Bianca, sweetheart, please try to understand. Your father, he is going through a difficult time and—" "You knew," I said. My voice was flat emotionless. I felt like I was watching this scene from somewhere far away. "You knew he was going to do this." She could not meet my eyes. I tried to talk him out of it. I really did. "But you know how he gets when he makes up his mind. Maybe if you apologize, maybe if you promise to be more involved with the family, apologize." I pulled my arm free. He just disowned me in front of 30 people. He said I was dead to him. "And you think I should apologize?" She reached for me again, but I stepped back. "I am your mother, Bianca. I love you. But I cannot go against your father. I cannot—" Her voice trailed off, and I realized with sudden devastating clarity that she had made her choice. She had probably made it decades ago when she quit her job and put on that pearl necklace and agreed to be Richard Whitmore's ornamental wife. She loved me in her own limited way, but she would never choose me. She would never stand up for me. She would never risk her comfortable life to defend her own daughter. "Goodbye, Mom," I said, and I turned and walked up the stairs to collect my things. It took me less than 10 minutes to pack my suitcase. I moved mechanically, folding clothes and gathering toiletries without really seeing any of it. The painting I had made for my father, the one I had spent over 100 hours on, still sat in its wrapping paper in the corner of the room. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I left it there. He did not deserve it. Maybe he never had. I carried my suitcase down the stairs and across the foyer. Through the closed dining room doors, I could hear conversation resuming laughter, even as though nothing had happened. The party was continuing without me. Life was going on. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold December night. Snow was falling again, thick white flakes that stuck to my hair and eyelashes. I loaded my suitcase into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the house where I had grown up. Somewhere around the Connecticut border, I had to pull over. My hands were shaking too hard to hold the steering wheel. I sat in a gas station parking lot for almost an hour, crying until I had nothing left, until my throat was raw, and my eyes were swollen, and the tears simply would not come anymore. Then I drove the rest of the way home to Brooklyn alone on Christmas Eve, to an apartment that had never felt emptier. I do not remember unlocking my apartment door that night. I do not remember changing out of my holiday dress or turning on the lights. What I remember is lying in the dark on my unmade bed, still wearing my coat, staring at the ceiling while snow fell past my window. The Christmas lights I had hung so optimistically a few weeks earlier blinked on and off in the corner, red and green and white, a mocking reminder of the celebration I was supposed to be part of. I thought about unplugging them, but could not find the energy to move. My phone sat on the nightstand face down and silent. I had turned it off somewhere on the drive home, unable to bear the thought of seeing messages or calls from anyone. From my mother making excuses. From Tessa pretending to sympathize while secretly gloating. From Marcus probably calling to make sure I had really left. I did not want to hear from any of them. I was not sure I ever wanted to hear from them again. The hours passed in a blur of darkness and quiet. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I opened my eyes to pale winter light streaming through my window and the sound of church bells ringing somewhere in the distance. Christmas morning. I had made it through the night. I lay there for a while taking inventory. My eyes were swollen and sore from crying. My throat felt like I had swallowed sandpaper. My head ached with the specific pain that comes from dehydration and emotional exhaustion. But I was alive. I was in my own apartment. my own space, a place where no one could hurt me or humiliate me or tell me I was not good enough. It was almost noon when I finally reached for my phone. I told myself I was just checking the time, but of course that was a lie. I was looking for some sign that what had happened last night had been a dream, that my family had come to their senses, that anyone had tried to reach out. What I found made me sit up so fast I got dizzy. 36 missed calls. I stared at the screen, not comprehending. 15 calls from my mother, 10 from Marcus, 7 from Tessa, 4 from numbers I did not recognize. The calls had started around 8 that morning and continued right up until 10 minutes ago. There were text messages too, dozens of them. From Marcus, "Call me immediately. This is urgent." From Tessa Bianca, "Please answer your phone. Something has happened." From my mother, "Sweetheart, call me as soon as you get this. It's about your father." From a number I did not recognize, "This is Dr. Patterson from Greenwich General. Please contact us regarding Richard Whitmore." My stomach dropped. Whatever had happened, it was serious. You do not get 36 missed calls on Christmas morning unless something has gone terribly wrong. For one wild moment, I considered not calling back. Let them deal with whatever crisis had erupted. They had made it clear I was not part of the family anymore. But I could not do it. Despite everything, despite the cruelty and the humiliation and the years of being made to feel worthless, I could not simply ignore this. If something had happened to my father, I needed to know. I called Marcus first. He answered on the second ring. His voice was ragged, stripped of the smug superiority I was used to hearing. "Bianca, thank God. Where have you been? I drove home last night. You know that. You watched me leave. Dad had a stroke. Last night right after you left. He collapsed at the dinner table. We called an ambulance and they took him to Greenwich General. He has been in the ICU all night." I could not speak. Whatever I had expected to hear, it was not this. Is he going to be okay?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "They do not know. The stroke was severe. He is in a coma. The doctors say the next 48 hours are critical. I should have felt satisfaction or vindication. The man who had publicly disowned me had collapsed minutes later, struck down as if by divine intervention. But all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest, a sadness that went deeper than I would have thought possible given everything he had done. "There is something else," Marcus continued, and now his voice had taken on a different quality. Urgency mixed with something that might have been fear. "You need to come back here, today. There is a situation with the will. The will I thought that was all sorted out. I saw the papers in Dad's study. I am not in it. That was the old will. Marcus paused and I heard him take a breath. "He signed a new one yesterday morning. Before the dinner, the lawyer just informed us. In the new will you need to come see for yourself." I did not understand what he was telling me, and his tone made me suspicious. "Why are you calling me Marcus? You did not exactly jump to my defense last night. Just come, okay? Come to the hospital. Mom needs you." He stopped himself, seeming to struggle with the next words. "We need to talk. As a family. Whatever is left of us." I told him I would be there in a few hours. Then I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed trying to make sense of what was happening. My father had a stroke. There was a new will. Marcus, who had never asked me for anything in his life, was practically begging me to come back. Something had shifted. I just did not know yet how dramatic that shift would prove to be. The drive back to Connecticut felt longer than it had 2 days earlier, though the roads were clear and the traffic was light. Most people were home with their families on Christmas morning, opening presents and eating cinnamon rolls and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. I was driving toward a hospital where my father might be dying, summoned by a brother who had watched me be disowned without saying a word. My feelings were a tangled mess that I could not even begin to sort through. Part of me was genuinely worried about my father. Whatever he had done, he was still the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle, who had carried me on his shoulders at the county fair, who had once upon a time looked at me with something other than disappointment. Those memories felt distant now, but they were real. They had happened. Another part of me was furious that I was expected to come running after everything that had occurred. Less than 12 hours ago, I had been declared dead to my family. Now they needed me. The irony was not lost on me. And underneath it all was a small, shameful hope that whatever Marcus had discovered would somehow vindicate me. That the new will would prove my father had not truly meant what he said. That there was some explanation for the cruel theater of the night before. I arrived at Greenwich General Hospital just after 2 p.m. The building was decorated for the holidays' wreaths on the doors, and a small Christmas tree in the lobby incongruous cheerfulness in a place of sickness and fear. I found my way to the ICU waiting room where my mother sat surrounded by her children. Diane saw me first. She rose from her chair and crossed the room in quick, unsteady steps, pulling me into an embrace that smelled of her familiar perfume and the sharp antiseptic of the hospital. "Oh, Bianca, I am so glad you came. I was so worried you would not come." I let her hold me for a moment before gently extracting myself. "How is he no change? The doctors say we just have to wait." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I cannot believe this is happening. Just last night he was—" She could not finish the sentence. I did not help her. Marcus stood when I approached. He looked like he had not slept, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled and weary. He did not try to hug me, which was probably wise. "Thanks for coming. You said there was something about the will." His jaw tightened. "Come with me. There is a conference room down the hall. Tessa, you too." Tessa rose from her chair, where Derek sat patting her hand. She had been crying, her makeup smeared, and her golden hair falling out of its careful style. She did not look at me directly as she followed Marcus out of the waiting room. The conference room was small and windowless, with a long table and chairs that looked designed for bad news. An older man in a gray suit was already there, papers spread out before him. He introduced himself as James Hartley, the family attorney. I had met him once or twice over the years at company events. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "I need to explain the situation." I sat. Marcus and Tessa took seats across from me, their faces tight with tension. "Your father called me yesterday morning," Hartley began. "Early around 7. He said he needed to make changes to his estate documents immediately. I tried to tell him it was Christmas Eve, and that we should wait until after the holidays, but he was insistent. He said it could not wait. He pulled a document from his stack and slid it across the table to me. "This is the new will he signed yesterday. You will notice it is significantly different from the version he had previously." I looked down at the pages, scanning the dense legal language. And then I saw it. My name appearing over and over again in sections labeled beneficiary and distribution. Under the terms of this new will, Hartley continued, "The Whitmore estate is divided as follows: 40% to Bianca Marie Whitmore, 30% each to Marcus and Tessa." The room went silent. I looked up to find my siblings staring at me with expressions of naked shock and, yes, anger. "That is not possible," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "Dad would never—" "He said last night that she was—" Mr. Hartley held up his hand. "There is more. Your father also left a letter to be read in the event of his incapacitation or death. He was very specific that Bianca should receive this letter first. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in my father's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same cramped script I had seen on countless birthday cards and report card comments over the years. I read it twice, then a third time, trying to absorb what it said. My father had been testing us. The scene at Christmas dinner, the public disownment, the cruel declaration that I was dead to him. It had all been a test. He had wanted to see how his children would react when they thought there was nothing to gain from me. He wanted to see who would defend me and who would stay silent. He wanted to know finally and definitively whether his family loved him or only his money. The results he wrote had confirmed his worst fears about Marcus and Tessa. They had watched their sister be humiliated without a word of protest. They had been, if anything, pleased by my disgrace. They had failed the test spectacularly. But that was not all. The letter went on to explain something I had never suspected. My father had spent his life regretting the choice he made at 22, when his own father had demanded he abandon his dream of becoming an architect and join the family furniture business instead. He had been a coward, he wrote. He had given up his passion for security and spent the next 4 decades resenting himself for it. When I had chosen to pursue art against his wishes, he had seen his own lost ambition reflected back at him. Instead of being proud of my courage, he had been jealous. He had punished me for having the strength he had never found in himself. I was wrong, the letter concluded. I was wrong about so many things, but most of all, I was wrong about you, Bianca. You are the only one of my children who chose integrity over ease. You're the only one who loved me for who I was not for what I could give you. I am sorry it took me so long to see it. I am sorry I almost ran out of time. The letter was signed with a shaky Richard and dated December 24th at 6:30 in the morning, 12 hours before he would stand up at that dinner table and pretend to disown me. I looked up from the pages to find Marcus and Tessa watching me with barely concealed hostility. "What does it say?" Marcus demanded. "What did he write?" I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. "That is between me and Dad. This is absurd." Marcus slammed his palm on the table. "That will is obviously not valid. He was clearly not in his right mind. We will contest it." James Hartley shook his head. "Your father was examined by a physician yesterday morning before signing these documents. He was found to be of sound mind and body. The will is valid and will stand up to any challenge you might bring. But I have given 15 years to that company," Marcus said, his voice rising. "Tessa and I have been here building this family, while she has been off in Brooklyn playing artist. She does not deserve—" I had heard enough. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You want to know what I deserve, Marcus? I deserve a family that does not treat me like an embarrassment. I deserve a father who does not publicly humiliate me at Christmas dinner. I deserve a brother who speaks up when his sister is being attacked, and a sister who actually acts like a sister." They stared at me, silent for once. "I do not know what I am going to do about this will." I held up the envelope. "But I know what I am not going to do. I am not going to sign anything that lets you two off the hook. I am not going to pretend that last night did not happen. And I am not going to apologize for being the person Dad apparently wished he had the courage to be." I walked to the door and paused, looking back at them. "You both watched him destroy me last night. You watched, and you did nothing. Now you are finding out that your cruelty has consequences. I think Dad would call that a valuable lesson in business." I left them sitting in that conference room with their shattered expectations and walked back to the ICU. There was a man in a hospital bed who I needed to see, a conversation that needed to happen whether he could hear me or not. The rehabilitation took almost a year. Not my father's rehabilitation, though that was long and difficult too. I mean my own recovery from 32 years of believing I was not good enough. In those first weeks after Christmas, I divided my time between Brooklyn and Connecticut. My father emerged from his coma on New Year's Day, confused and partially paralyzed on his left side. The stroke had damaged parts of his brain that controlled movement and speech, leaving him struggling to walk and slurring his words. The doctors said he would need months of intensive therapy. They could not promise he would ever fully recover. I visited him in the hospital twice a week. Our conversations were halting, at first limited by his difficulty speaking and my uncertainty about how to feel. But slowly, painfully, we began to talk. Really talk for the first time in my adult life. He told me about his own father, a stern and demanding man who had viewed ambition as disloyalty. He described the day he tore up his architecture school acceptance letter and agreed to join the family business. He explained how that resentment had curdled over the decades, poisoning his relationships with everyone around him, especially me. I told him about the years I had spent chasing his approval, always falling short, never understanding why. I described the way his criticism had made me doubt my talent, my choices, my worth as a person. I admitted that part of me had stopped trying to earn his love because it seemed impossible. These were not easy conversations. There were tears and arguments and sessions that ended with one of us walking out of the room in frustration. But we kept coming back. We kept trying. Spring arrived, and with it my father's transfer to a rehabilitation center closer to my apartment in Brooklyn. I think he chose that location deliberately, a gesture of reconciliation that did not require him to say the words out loud. I helped him move in and met his therapists and found myself doing something I never expected. I started to forgive him. Not all at once, not completely. Some wounds are too deep to heal entirely. But I began to understand that my father's cruelty had come from his own pain, his own failures, his own lifetime of regret. It did not excuse what he had done. Nothing could excuse that Christmas dinner. But it helped me see him as a flawed human being, rather than a villain. By summer, I had made some decisions about my life. I used part of my expected inheritance to lease studio space in an old warehouse in Bushwick. I hired 2 young designers who reminded me of myself a decade earlier, talented and passionate and desperate for someone to give them a chance. I named the company Whitmore Creative, partly as a reclamation of the name that had caused me so much pain. My father cried when I told him, actual tears rolling down his weathered face. He could not say much, his speech still affected by the stroke, but he managed 4 words that I will carry with me forever. I am proud, Bianca. Marcus and Tessa contested the will as Marcus had promised. The legal battle dragged on for months, consuming time and money, and whatever remnants of family feeling might have survived. In the end, a judge upheld the document exactly as written. My siblings received their 30% each, along with control of the furniture business that had always meant more to them than I had. I received my 40%, plus something money could not buy, the knowledge that I had finally been seen. I do not speak to Marcus or Tessa anymore. They made their choices, and I made mine. Sometimes I wonder if they will ever understand what they lost. Not the money, but the possibility of being a real family. Probably not. Some people are so focused on what they can count that they never notice what truly counts. My mother exists in a strange middle ground. She calls me occasionally, updates me on Tessa's children, and Marcus's latest business deals, carefully avoids mentioning the rift that runs through the center of our family. I listen and respond politely and feel nothing much at all. She chose her side long ago. I have stopped expecting her to choose differently. But here is what I have learned, and this is the reason I wanted to tell you this story. Family is not just the people who share your blood. Family is the people who show up when you need them, who celebrate your successes and comfort your failures, who see you clearly and love you anyway. By that definition, my biological family was never really a family at all. They were just people I happened to be related to. The real family I have built in the years since that Christmas is smaller but infinitely more valuable. There is Maya, my business partner, who brings me coffee when I work late and tells me the truth even when I do not want to hear it. There is Dr. Harrison, my therapist, who helped me understand that my worth was never dependent on my father's approval. There are the artists and designers who work in my studio, who have become more like siblings to me than Marcus and Tessa ever were. And there is my father, strangely enough. The relationship we have now after everything that happened is better than any we had before. It is honest in a way it never was when he was healthy and powerful, and I was constantly trying to earn his love. We talk on the phone every Sunday. He comes to my gallery openings in his wheelchair, beaming with pride I once thought I would never see. Forgiveness, I have discovered, is not about saying what happened was okay. It is about refusing to let what happened control you any longer. My father hurt me deeply and repeatedly for 32 years. He also loved me in his broken and inadequate way, and he spent the last year of his life trying to make amends. Both of those things are true. I do not have to choose between them. The snow is falling again tonight. I am sitting in my studio surrounded by designs for a project I am genuinely excited about, thinking about how far I have come from that broken woman crying in a gas station parking lot on Christmas Eve. I am not the same person I was then. I am stronger. I am kinder. I am more myself than I have ever been. Sometimes being cut off from your family is not a tragedy. Sometimes it is a gift. It forces you to ask who you really are when no one is telling you who to be. It challenges you to build something new from the wreckage of something old. It teaches you that the only approval you truly need is your own. I used to think my father's rejection on that Christmas night was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I understand it was the beginning of my real life. So here is my question for you, and I hope you will leave your answer in the comments. Have you ever been rejected by someone you loved, only to discover that the rejection led you somewhere better? Have you learned, as I did, that sometimes the people who say they love you are actually holding you back from becoming who you are meant to be? I would love to hear your stories. We are all navigating these complicated family relationships. And I think there is comfort in knowing we are not alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel if you want to be part of this community, where we talk honestly about life and love and the messy business of being human. Thank you for spending this time with me. Whatever family challenges you are facing, I hope you find your way to peace. I hope you discover, as I did, that you are enough exactly as you are. And I hope this holiday season brings you closer to the people who truly deserve your love. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. And remember, sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one.